So it's time to take all that hard work you did in the external and internal analysis and do something with it. Get to that decisions and actions phase of the strategy making process. And today we're going to be talking about the basic business level strategy. Before we dive in, let's do a little bit of a thought experiment. Let's say that you're a manager, a senior manager at the Ford Motor Company, and you've been charged with increasing the profitability of the Fusion line. And you've also been given some resources. They've said you can spend up to $10 million over the next 12 months to increase the profitability of the Fusion line. I've given you some options on the screen. What do you think you're most likely to pick if you were the manager in this case? How you answer that question depends in part on how you see the Fusion positioned and how you see the car and the pathway you see to increase profitability for that product. It is lagging, obviously, to the toughest cars in the industry to beat, and that would be the Accord and the Camry. But how you got at that problem might hint at what sort of generic strategy you would tend to prefer. So today we're going to be talking about business level strategy. I'm going to introduce you to the generic strategies, but I'm going to try to take us well beyond the discussion in the textbook, and I'm also going to try to set up the activities we're going to do either online or in the face-to-face class so that you can see a little bit more about them. This textbook is particularly strong in that it talks about the product life cycle and what hath the internet wrought, excuse me, which is something most textbooks don't cover. So we'll dive into that. Before we get into it, though, I want you to ask yourself, how many of you consider yourselves brand conscious? What brands are you loyal to? Why are you loyal to those brands? And then on the flip side, how many of you would say, I'm pretty price conscious? That would be me. And so I'm not nearly as loyal to brands. I don't have polo ponies or anything on my polo shirts, or any monograms down here on my shirts. I'm a pretty generic guy, I guess. So you want to think about that. So let's just think about you, because when we talk about setting a strategy, we need to go back to the beginning, which is the customer. Now, in a strategy class, we're usually not creating a company. In a strategy perspective, we're usually taking an existing company and looking at evolving its strategy. From a pure startup fashion, then you really have the most basic question of who am I going to appeal to and why am I going to appeal to them? Usually with a strategy, in an ongoing strategy, you already have customers, and it's a matter of kind of what comes first, the product or the customer. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg sort of thing. But you take wherever you are in the decision making process and you say, who are we serving and what needs are we meeting of theirs? For example, we've sometimes used the Aldi's as a position and trade-off bid. Who are their customers? Very price sensitive grocery shoppers. They knew who their customers are and they know clearly what they're trying to do to meet them. So in your case, you're going to have to ask yourself a couple of key questions. Are we going to meet them by being the cheapest product on the market? Are we going to meet them by offering features or service components that they want that our competitors don't offer as well? Are we going to go into some niche where we do a few things very well for a certain segment of customers? Or are we going to do some of all the above, believe it or not? And then, from a strategic perspective, where I'm not starting from scratch, at the end of the analysis process, what is it that my firm has as its strengths? What are the opportunities out there? And then how are we going to meld them together to take advantage of my core competencies that should lead to a competitive advantage? I really like another textbook's definition of a business level strategy, so I'll let you get that off the screen. It's the set of commitments and decisions to gain a competitive advantage by exploiting core competencies in a specific product market. Put it more basically, this is the position trade-off fit that Porter talks about. Now, we introduced early on in some of our early discussions this question of, do all firms have a strategy? And I think in a lot of cases they don't, and it doesn't really matter. I'll give you some examples. How about all of the electrical supply contractors you see driving around town? What about all the plumbers? If you ask them what their strategy is, it's probably to do a good job, to grow my business through word of mouth, to stay on the cutting edge of the services, but they don't really try to distinguish themselves from one another. and it probably doesn't matter. But what they're doing is they're largely dividing up the pie, and they're using customer loyalty and their personal relationships to try to build their business, which is perfectly valid. But let me give you an example of a small business that probably doesn't know he has a strategy, but he does. I have a friend that cleans carpets, and he talks about how he'll get calls all the time by people who say, well, how much would it cost to give you this, to clean these amount of rooms in my home? And he told me this is a standard line. He goes, well, I'm going to tell you how much I'll charge, but I'm going to tell you right up front, if you're calling around everybody, I will not be the cheapest guy, but I am the best value for you because I do most of the carpet cleaning myself. I don't have a large staff. He's a man about my age, very clean, very reputable, high integrity. And he says, this is not going to be a bunch of bums trundling around in your home. This is going to be me. And to the extent that I have workers, it's going to be a few workers that are under my close supervision. And he does a great job of upselling himself. And so instantly, he tries to connect with people and make them more comfortable that they're going to get a quality job by somebody they can trust. But he tells them right up front, it's not going to be as cheap as other people. So it's a very cool differentiation sort of strategy. But there's trade-offs involved. What's he basically selling? Himself. Well, he can only scale himself so far, so he's putting practical limits on how much he can grow the firm. One thing I want to try to clear up, or maybe muddy, I don't know, depending on your perspective, is a lot of times people talk about the position as though it's synonymous with the strategy, and it usually is. But keep in mind that just because somebody is low price doesn't mean that they have a successful cost leadership strategy working at all. They may be a lot more stuck in the middle than we realize. And I'm going to tip my hand because I want you to be asking yourself a question as we go. The way Porter developed this model, particularly in the beginning, these strategies were very digital. You were one or you were the other, and the two did not mix in any form or fashion. I think they're a lot more a lot more analog than that, or shades of gray, or however you want to put it. And I'd like you to be thinking about that as we go through. Now, again, this is another thing from the Porter article about do firms have strategies? And he says that if you want to position yourself differently, you either got to perform the activities differently, or you got to perform different activities. You got to provide different types of value, or you're going to provide that value in different ways. And I think that's good, but I also want to make a plea for what about just doing the same thing as everybody else, but doing it better than them? And I think to a certain extent that's Walmart. Walmart doesn't do anything differently than anybody else. It just does what it does better than everybody else who tries to copy them. These are the generic strategies that we're going to be talking about. One thing I want you to know is that box in the middle where you see the integrated cost leadership differentiation. Some people call it a combination strategy. Some call it best value strategy. We'll just call it an integrated strategy. In Porter's mind, that box wasn't there, and he'll still kind of argue it shouldn't be there, but we're going to see that really the data doesn't support his views. So in the next video, we're going to pick up and begin our discussion with cost leadership strategies. Join me.